Hey guys, welcome back to 52 Lockup with 52 Crimes in 52 Weeks. It's kind of awkward to smile because I'm trying to be as welcoming as possible, but here goes nothing. Warning, discretion. I'm not even kidding. Please, if you can't do this episode, please don't. Just don't do it. So with that being said, I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning. Today I'm covering the famous Sandy Hook Elementary shooting. So the details of what happened to the children are there, but they're not necessarily graphic. I'm going to be kind of walking you through Adam Lanza's life and kind of just what spiraled down to this the most heinous mass shooting in American history. So there it goes. Nancy Lanza was actually born Nancy Jean Champion in Newton, Connecticut. She was nicknamed Beanie, actually, in high school, according to her yearbooks. Her mom was a school nurse. Her brother actually became the town police officer. She was kind of described as having like a very charmed life. She met her future husband, which would be Peter J. Lanza, and they got married on June 6, 1981. The couple actually ended up building their home next door to Nancy's childhood home. She eventually left as a stockbroker and just became a stay-at-home mom. So 81, they're married. 5 years later, in 1986, they had their first son, Ryan John Lanza. And then the infamous day of April 22nd, 1992, Adam Peter Lanza was born in New Hampshire. He was considered to be very quiet, socially awkward. He didn't really speak until he was 3 years old. And he always understood more words than he could actually speak. He showed a lot of hypersensitivity to like physical touch. Like tags from the clothes had to be removed. But either way, he was in preschool and at Sandy Hook, where he was actually a pupil at, until the beginning of the 6th grade. He sometimes would smell things that like weren't there. His hands, like he would just wash them like excessively. So eventually the parents are getting him checked out, and a doctor diagnosed him with sensory integration disorder. And Adam underwent speech therapy and occupational therapy in kindergarten and the 1st grade. So teachers were told to like watch out for like seizures. So there's a lot of stuff already happening with his head. Ryan, his older brother, remembers how incredibly close Adam was with their father, Peter. They'd spend like hours together playing like Lego tables in the basement, making up stories for the little towns that they like build. Adam was apparently very creative. He would invent his own board games. And according to the New Yorker interview with the father, Peter Lanza, Adam actually loved Sandy Hook, the school, like the elementary school. Even as he got older, he said he loved how much, being like a little kid, that's what he wanted to do because he wanted to stay at that school. Although he was close to his father, he still struggled with a lot of basic emotions and received like, coaching from his mom in regards to like dealing with that. It said that whenever he had to show feelings, his mom was trying to coach him, and she had apparently told a friend, "Oh my God, Adam has taken it very seriously to do this school play. He's even practicing like his facial expressions in the mirror." However, in hindsight, when Adam was in the 5th grade, according to the state attorney's report, Adam began to think that other people in the world deserved so much more than he did in life. This is the 5th grade. Later in the same year, Adam was paired up with a boy, and they wrote a story called The Big Book of Granny, 5th grade. The story was about an old woman with a gun in her cane, and she's going around killing. By the 3rd chapter, Granny and her son want to do taxidermy for a boy that they want as a mantelpiece. And in one of the chapters, I believe one of the characters called Dora, the Berserker, says, "I like hurting people, especially children." 5th grade. Adam even tried to sell copies of this book, apparently, at the school, and then that's where he got in trouble. This is strange because the school kind of didn't react to this the way that I would anticipate. And I mean, that's not your average book publishing a story like a 5th grader like wrote, like, "Oh my God, I wrote this amazing story." Not normal. again, a couple of years later, a teacher had even noted disturbing violence in his writing and described him as a very intelligent but not normal with antisocial issues. The parents' marriage at this point is now starting to unravel for their personal reasons. I didn't really go deep into that research about their marriage. I wasn't concerned. Peter's own father had relatively been very Peter became disengaged from the family life at some point, right? And I'm going to walk you through that. And that's kind of where I wonder how much of a influence it had on the family, right? Because he began working Peter was working crazy hours, and then Nancy was kind of stuck with the kids. So on the weekends, he would spend time with the kids, and then she'd be doing all the errands. And then in between those days, the mom had him. He would take the boys on hiking trips on the weekend. But by 2001, the couple separates. So Adam is 9, right? When a psychiatrist later asked him about it, he said that his parents were as irritating to each other as they were to him himself. The Peter describes the separation kind of he's it's no different than when we were together. I see the kids on the weekend and she takes care of them during the day. To him, nothing really changed when they separated. And now by this point, Adam's now entering middle school, which he was actually excited about. And he became really he was so excited about it. He became extremely loquacious about it when he was discussing with his father, telling him all about the school, how much he enjoyed doing political debates. And apparently he was a fan of Ron Paul and liked to argue economic theory. He became fascinated with a lot of these things, but also became fascinated with guns at this point, as well as the Second World War. Now, he also showed interest in being a part of the military, but he never talked about mass murder because he was never known to be violent in school. He was never remembered in that sense, acting out physically upon that. So although he did struggle with his emotions, he did still struggle with other things, right? He had a sharp sense of humor, which his father remembered taking him to a Bill Cosby show. He loved the reruns of Bob Newhart show, and he loved Get Smart, which he loved to watch with his father. And even for one Christmas, apparently Adam had told his parents that he wanted to use his savings to buy toys for needy children. And Peter took him up. He's like, hey, let's go shopping. Let's go do this. And it seems like a lot of his happiness, as you're looking back, kind of revolved around his father as he's still developing and changing. The drastic changes from Adam still continued because at one point, one day, when he's in middle school, the structure of the school changed. So instead of sitting in one classroom like you normally would in elementary school, now you have to move room to room, right? Everyone kind of knows that. But because he had to go from room to room, instead of sitting in one room and the teacher's coming to him, he took it as a punishment. So his sensory overload starts really hyping up. And because of that, it starts to affect his ability to concentrate in class. So his mom starts to do everything she could to help him cope, right? So she's Xerox copying his textbooks and make them only black and white because apparently the color graphics were bothering him. He started to actually stop playing music, which is apparently something he used to do because he loved playing the saxophone, right? He did his little quirky things like climbing trees, but then he started to stop doing that and then avoiding eye contact with people. And then his gait was off. And as a side note, your gait is considered a person's walking pattern, right? So, however, for it to become considered abnormal, it can include a couple of other signs, right? Neurological conditions, motor impairments, or sensory, right? Perhaps he quit saxophone because there was a neurological condition that was overlooked. He could have had orthopedic issues like osteoarthritis, which is actually inflammation in the bones, or a skeletal deformity that would explain his change in his gait, right? And again, a gait disorder can also come from other medical conditions like heart failure, respiratory insufficiency, or peripheral arterial occlusive disease, which is actually a blockage of the artery in the legs. It can happen in the arms, very rare, but it can happen. But that would have meant by the age of middle school, he would have been exposed to atherosclerosis, which is actually clogged arteries. When you look at all the potential reasons for the gait disorder occurring and what happened and the other things that are kind of going on in his life, you kind of start to go, this is neurological, right? He was still going through his sensory overload, which is starting from a kid, going all the way into middle school, and it keeps just getting worse and getting worse and getting worse and getting worse and getting worse, right? which, by the way, sensory overload is when there's too much sensory information entering into the brain at the same time, and the brain can't prioritize, like, what do I focus on? Your brain is like all over the place. Like, what do I focus on, right? Now, Adam starts to make these changes as well. He starts to hate birthdays. He starts to hate holidays. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because there's too much sensory overload for like colors, lights, music, everything that's happening, even if it's within the home. Okay, now, when someone is going through sensory overload, they begin to have difficulty focusing, right? Their sensors don't know what they're supposed to focus on, but they can also become extremely irritable, restless. They can have the urge to cover their ears, their eyes, whatever it is that's overloading them, they're going to want it to stop, right? And they can also feel overly excited, right? They can feel extreme amounts of stress, fear, anxiety. They can also feel sensory overload from whatever's like touching their skin, like fabric, right? Or the tags on his clothing, like he would do as a kid, right? So Adam is going from all the things that he loved and enjoyed to suddenly it like no, he can't do it. Like, this is too much. He can't handle this. As he's in middle school, he begins to have panic attacks to the point that his mom had to frequent to the school because of his panic attacks, just because of how excessive they were. Now, again, we're in a short time frame, so I know it seems like it's a lot of information, but it's a short time frame. Now, when he's 13, people are starting to associate him with the signs of autism. So he actually ends up being diagnosed on the autistic spectrum disorder now, which is now called ASD. Which is a range of characterized conditions that are like challenges for like social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. Do not judge anyone on the spectrum based on Adam. I am only telling the story, so please do not judge people who are autistic. There are people who do not have autism and commit horrific crimes. So the spectrum is actually wider than most people realize, which is still being studied today. So his parents are seeing all and going through all those changes, and they're doing the best that they can. They're co-parenting because they're separated, but they see that their son needs something. And now that he's 13 years old, they're like, all right, listen, we're trying everything. Let's take him to a psychiatrist. They take him to a psychiatrist, Paul J. Fox, who actually takes a look at him and goes and diagnoses him with Asperger's syndrome, right? Which is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by significant difficulties in social interaction and nonverbal communication, along with restricted and, like, again, the repetitive patterns of behavior and interests. These are key things. The term is still used, but technically it has been changed over, like I said just a second ago, about being the autistic spectrum disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. So now they get a diagnosis. The family's like, we're psyched. Now we can get him the help that he actually needs because he's so unhappy. He's so upset, this and this. Like, they're like, oh my God, this is great. Adam's not falling for it. He's like, fuck that. I don't have Asperger's. He's not accepting it, right? So the both of his parents are trying to engage him in a way that like makes his life better. They want to like do anything that they can, right? So now they're like, all right, well, he won't accept the diagnosis, but let's see what we can do. His father starts attending meetings of the global and regional Asperger syndrome partnership in order to like talk to the other adults who actually have Asperger. And he's like, hey, can you give me some insight on what my son's life could be like in the future? And he's also even hoping, hey, what if I get him in here, he can meet other people who have the same exact condition. He'll make friends. He may even get married someday. So he's got this support system going. The mom is over there. She's like, what if I move out of town 50 miles away where their schools have a tighter structure for those with special needs? Like, this is going to be great for him. They're on like positive plan thinking. They are on it because they feel like we got the diagnosis. Now we can solve our son's problem. And even briefly for a minute, he was actually enrolled into a Catholic school that seemed to offer structure, but it didn't go well. For some reason, it wasn't explained, but apparently it didn't go well. So again, his psychiatrist, Fox, recommends, why don't we do homeschooling? Because it seems like he was making the argument for the parents that there were a lot of disadvantages of sending him to a regular school versus like homeschooling. Like there was a little bit of a argument back and forth because of it promoted isolation from his peers. Like there's a little bit of back and forth with it. But now we're going from middle school to now he's in the 8th grade now, right? So he's now in the 8th grade. His mom is teaching him humanities. His father's meeting up with him like twice a week to teach him science. His mom, Nancy, even coordinated with the school to match the curriculum to Newton High School, right? Because now he's like in the ninth grade, right? To make sure Adam doesn't get his GED. She wants him to graduate on time, right? They're like, we're going to make sure he's got a good life. He's got something. They're on it, right? His mother was like very active, but she mostly was the one that controlled majority of the decisions. You know, and the father kind of just took the backseat, right? Which he does admit to. So Adam continued his, even though he was homeschooled, he was in Newton's High Tech Club meetings. So he felt more comfortable there to the point that he even threw a party for the club at his house. It was those small moments that kind of gave his parents like hope, you know? But still, Adam still struggled with a lot of social problems, social skills, right? He even asked his father, why do you need friends? And as this continued over time, Adam became frustrated with his parents, with their teaching. He began to make complaints about the classes and the class material. He just was not happy, right? Now he's 14 years old. His brother Ryan graduates high school. He leaves for college because he's just out, right? Peter and Nancy end up taking him to Yale's Child Study Center for further diagnosis because they're like, all right, we've been doing this for a year. We can't get any help. They take him to a psychiatrist, right? Robert King. He notices that Adam has now developed an obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, right? Which can accompany autism, right? He notices this because Adam refused to touch metal objects, which is strange, right? Considering the circumstance. He, like doorknobs, he wouldn't let his mother touch them, right? He feared they were like contaminated, and he didn't like his mother doing a lot of things like leaning on certain objects in the house. If she walked in front of him, like entering another room, like the kitchen, he would make her step out and then redo it. Like she had to come in behind her. I mean, the psychiatrist noticed, like at least psychiatrist King had noticed that the parents were more focused on his schooling and they weren't as focused on the social disabilities that he had, which he saw actually as a like big red flag, right? He also noticed that the mom was becoming a prisoner in her own home, right? And when he ends up returning back to his other psychiatrist, Fox, Adam ends up being prescribed Lexapro, which is an antidepressant that's usually prescribed for like one of the 12 major types of depression and for, of course, for people of anxiety, which would fit Adam, right? Unfortunately, while he was on a prescription, his mom reported that he was like in a very vegetative state, just kind of like not there and very lethargic. And then as soon as he quit, that he never took any more like psychotropic pills anymore, right? So now we're to 2009. The couple completely separates. Adam is now 16 years old. Peter ends up like relocating to Stanford, even though he's still like paying alimony. I think it was like $240,000 or something like that, with like periodic increases. But they were still doing everything they can to like help him, right? So Peter Lanza does an interview with the New Yorker, and according to the studies in that article, it says violence by autistic people is more commonly known as reactive than planned, right? It's triggered. You know, like for an example, an invasion of personal space. Studies of people with autism who have committed crimes suggest that at least half also suffer from an additional condition of psychosis. In about 25% of cases, basically, some researchers believe that a marked increase in the intensity of an autistic person's preoccupations can be a warning sign, especially if those preoccupations have a sinister aspect. It seems like in hindsight truly is 2020, right? With this particular situation. As I was reading more and more about Adam, I started to kind of get the impression that Asperger's was kind of unintentionally masking potential spectrum of schizophrenia, right? So just so you know, schizophrenia does have a spectrum, right? So I was just kind of like, this isn't seeming like autistic anymore. It just seems like they're focused on autism, but there's something else actually really happening, right? So just so you know, psychopathy and autism both lack in empathy. However, there are differences, right? And the order to distinguish them is if you look at their cognitive empathy, right? We are not, like a cystic person may have difficulty understanding what the emotions are, right? Autistic person, right? They may have trouble interpreting what others, like nonverbal social cues are, right? Emotional empathy of a psychopath will have no concern about hurting other people. They have the inability to share their feelings. So a lot of times when this comes up, autism will be referred to in court as a way to argue for leniency based on the grounds that the autistic person is confused about the cause and effect of their actions. However, in Adam's case, it doesn't really apply, right? It's hard because when you look back, you see the precautionary like steps that he took later on, like destroying one of his hard drives that had an electronic spreadsheet about the mass murder. He also had photographs of himself holding a gun to his head. Like, there's too much there for it to be like, I don't think this is, it just wasn't fitting for the autistic thing, right? There are also references that his mother, that when the school, when he was a kid, the mom had told the school, just because something physically hurts Adam doesn't mean he's going to stop. So he didn't seem to have like much of a sensitivity in regards to that. And later on, it is said that in a recent study suggested that perhaps his lack of empathy actually came from his inability or insensitivity to feel physical pain, right? So Nancy would, at this point, she's emailing the father like, hey, Adam had another bad night. And then eventually she started telling Peter that, hey, you shouldn't visit Adam, like, on his bad days. Like, don't come visit him. So Peter, not, wanting to, like, upset him and following Nancy's words, he decided, all right, I'll work with it. Because they're trying to do co-parenting, right? And managing Adam, in hindsight, was like Nancy's obsession with indulging his every compulsion, right? Which is a big, big issue. Which exacerbated the situation, right? Adam began to have even more difficulty with coordination, which goes back to the neurological problems that he was having, right? Did I just do a Bailey's Harriet? I did. But by the time Adam was 17, his father had told Nancy one time during a hike, hey, we were walking and Adam tied his shoes. And Nancy's like, he was able to tie his own shoes? Now, why would she be surprised? Because this can be an indicator that he was aware of the control he had over his mother and was abusing the power over her, and then acting differently when he was around the father, which says a lot, right? So now he knows which parent he can fuck with, right? That's important as the story continues. Sorry, I look psychotic. Adam still had a sense of humor-ish. And around when he was turning between 16 to 17, he had found the picture of Karl Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, that said, comrades, we must rectify the faltering facial hair standards, right? His father thought it was hilarious, and he was like, hey, I'm gonna get some t-shirts made with the image and the words that Adam had written. They were trying everywhere. I mean, everywhere Adam looked, people were constantly trying to encourage Adam, as well as engage him as much as possible. They were doing their best to give him a strong, full-on, loving support system. And one of the ways that, unfortunately, that they decided to engage him, Nancy began to take him on trips to the shooting range. Now, both parents had considered their son to be non-violent, right? So they had this long history where he's not really breaking any rules. He's not really being violent, aside from that story he wrote in the 5th grade, but only wrote it. He didn't act it out, right? And they knew that the best way to build a connection with someone with Asperger's is to participate in their fascinations, which included guns and the war, World War II, and like military, right? So he was considered to be nonviolent. So they kind of opened up the pathway, like, we're going to connect with him on this, right? So now let's get back to 2009. The parents now divorced, right? Peter buys Adam a car, even teaches him how to drive it. And then Adam apparently was referred to as an extremely careful driver, right? Which adds on to the idea why his parents didn't think of him as violent. Like, they're like, he's not going to break a rule. He's never going to do anything wrong. It doesn't make any sense. However, his father did notice that he began losing interest in him. He didn't take offense to it. I mean, it was just sort of, I guess, revered as a normal teenage thing, right? I mean, how could Peter know that his son pulling away from him meant something, right? Later on, Adam began to talk less and less, even to his own mother. She had to email him from the house, and then he became obsessed with mass murders. Now, this took his attention from school, so he begins focusing on that. Now he's struggling in school. Nancy's trying to we got to get you back focused on school. She even tries getting him a tutor, but every time he would get ready for the tutor, he would have a meltdown 10 minutes before they leave. 10 minutes, right? And she would just cater to whatever he wanted, and then they wouldn't go, right? Now, Adam began to frolic out like different aspirations and ideas that he had, like, oh, I'm going to attend Cornell. He didn't have the school average for it. Yeah, I'm going to join the military. And then he finally gets into a small argument, or disagreement rather, with his father about him wanting to go to Norwalk Community College. He wanted to take like 5 classes there. And judging from his history, his father's like, well, I think 5 classes may be too much. That may be like a major sensory overload. Peter suggests, let's do 2 classes. And Adam's like, fuck this, I'm taking the 5. So they're having, like, Adam is pissed at his father for this, right? So after this, he doesn't see his son anymore after 2010, right? Now, in the background of all this happening, Adam's brother Ryan graduates from college and he moves to New Jersey away from his brother. So Adam was very resentful towards his father for telling him that the classes would be like a heavy overload. So Nancy's catering to whatever it is that he wants. Nancy keeps telling him, you got to talk to your father. And he's like, I don't want to talk to him. She's advocating for the father, and it's just not happening. And she's just listening to whatever the kid wants, right? So now Nancy has full control over the situation and would tell Peter about this. And this obviously would hurt him. And they're trying to like work around it. Peter didn't want to show up at the house, make the kid uncomfortable, and cause a fight, which would cause them a drastically bigger separation, right? There's so much happening. So Peter's trying to accommodate everyone, but he's like, there's too much happening, right? He wanted to cause his son another like major meltdown, right? And then he didn't want problems with Nancy because they're trying to co-parent. Like, there's a lot of chaos kind of like brewing that this kid's like kind of got going, right? Nancy's cushioning everything like all around to make sure he's super happy. Now, in the meantime, Peter meets another woman named Shelley, who he never introduced to his son, Adam, because he was afraid that it would actually cause another, again, sensory overload. He may freak out, may get pissed at him. He's like already having, trouble with his son. Shelley actually only met Ryan. So now we're up to 2011. Adam is becoming more independent according to the emails that Nancy was sending. He was going to like the local movie house theater to like play DDR, Dance Dance Revolution. And his relationship with his father and his brother, again, become more and more and more strained. He didn't want to respond to even their emails or their phone calls. And Nancy would just make up excuses for him, right? Even though he wasn't even talking to Nancy, and Nancy had to email him herself, right? So she's a prisoner in her own home still, and nobody realizes what's happening. Peter stated that he thinks that she wanted everyone to think she could handle the situation. Everything is fine, right? And she just didn't ask for the help that she needed, right? She never complained about it. She was good. She kept guns in the house, right? She left her bedroom door unlocked. So it was evident that she obviously didn't find her son to be a threat, but rather surrounded her son and responded to her son based on the anxiety that she felt trying to cater to him as much as possible. Even a week before the mass shooting, Nancy apparently even told an acquaintance that she was worried, like, oh my God, I'm losing my son. And she even referenced losing him in a sense more of a personal withdrawal opposed to him actually becoming violent. And it's a very tense situation, right? So at some point, Nancy actually once asked Adam if he would feel anything. Like, honey, would you feel anything if anything happened to me? He told her no. He just straight up said no. He later wrote apparently about that situation in a Word document on his computer about why females are inherently selfish, like very patriarchal kind of like letter here. And labeled the document selfish, which was found on his computer later on. He was referencing the question that she asked him, even though she was accommodating him in every way possible. Now we get to the sad day. December 14th, 2012. Adam Lanza wakes up. He puts on black clothes. He's got yellow earplugs on, sunglasses, and his olive green utility vest. He wasn't wearing body armor, which is what was initially reported. He shot his mother 4 times in the bed with a .22 caliber rifle. And according to some studies, matricide is often committed by sons who were overprotected, right? Which kind of does put Adam in that category, right? Because that's the first person he kills. A son who had committed a similar crime in the studies had stated that it's often as a desperate act to free themselves, right, from the states of their dependency on their mother, a dependency that they believe has not allowed them to grow up, right? The mother has not allowed them to grow up, so they've murdered the mother. Although in another study, It was stated that the mother-child relationship became so unusually tense, right, and conflict-laden, while the father was uniformly passive and remained relatively uninvolved. This seems to be more accurate in describing the situation with Peter and Nancy as they were handling Adam, even though Adam was pulling a lot of the strings, from my perspective. He grabbed his brother's ID, Ryan's ID, drove in his mother's car to the school that once made him the happiest kid on the planet. I mean, shortly after 9:35 a.m., armed with his mother's Bushmaster rifle and 10 magazines with 30 rounds each, he walked into Sandy Hook Elementary. And just for the record, the school had actually just put in a protocol that the school doors locked down promptly at 9:30. So he couldn't get in, so he shot through the glass. This was actually a new system that was implemented into the school like a month prior to the shooting, which still is a tragedy, but it does make me question if he would have killed more children had this not been placed in. Like, it's just a weird question, right? He shoots the glass door where Principal Dawn Hotchspring and the school psychologist, Mary Sherlock, were in a meeting with other faculty members. They're all talking about stuff. They hear a gunshot. Bang, 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 bang. Right? And they're like, what the hell's that? So they get up. The principal, the school psychologist, and the teacher, Natalie Hammond, went into the hallway to go check out and see what's the noise. And that's where they met Adam. These women immediately scream, "Shooter, stay put!" They just scream, right? So a teacher goes hiding into a math lab. And while all this chaos is happening, because the information is going to come at you quick, right? She hears a janitor scream, Rick Thorne. He yelled, "Put the gun down!" Adam at this point had already killed the principal, the school psychologist, the teacher, Natalie Hammond, who was in a hallway. She actually got shot first in the leg. And then when she went down, she kind of just played dead. And then when she didn't hear him anymore far away, she actually crawled her way into a conference room, right? And as he's walking through, and keep in mind, this is at 9:35, a 9-year-old boy later on stated that he had heard Adam say, "Put your hands up," and someone else says, "Don't shoot." The students hear people screaming for their lives, yelling gunshots over the intercom, while the teachers were taking refuge in a closet in the gymnasium. Like, they were just trying to hide the kids as quick as possible. I mean, because these are elementary kids, right? A substitute kindergarten teacher was wounded by a ricochet bullet while she was closing the door. Adam apparently decided not to enter her classroom. He did, however, go into the main office, and he didn't see that there were people there hiding. And he just simply stepped out and then just immediately went for, like, victims that were visible and accessible to him, right? Even the school nurse, Sarah Cox, hid under her desk, and she remembers seeing the door open, which, right? And then seeing his boots facing her about 20 feet away, facing her, stands there for a few seconds, walks away. He's not going to hunt for his victim. He wants victims in front of him, right? And it was the school nurse and the school secretary, Barbara Halstead, who actually dialed 911, right? And they hid inside of the first aid supply closet for like 4 hours. Adam walked into the first grade classroom that he saw, where teacher Lauren Rousseau, a substitute teacher, I apologize if I butcher the name, she was like hurling all her students like into the back room, first grade student. She's like trying to put them all into the back room. She's trying to hide them in the bathroom. Adam forces his way into the door and guns her down, where her and a behavioral therapist who had just taken the job, Rachel Davino, were all killed. 15 of the students were actually killed, and just so you know, initially on the scene, 14 died. There was one that was left that was actually injured, who later on died at the hospital. There was a sole survivor, 6-year-old girl, who was found by the police in the classroom that followed the shooting, and it's apparent that she survived because she hid in the corner of the classroom's bathroom during the shooting. And even the little girl's family's pastor said that he believed that the reason why she survived was because she was playing dead. When her mother got to her, the first thing out of her mouth, 6 years old, the first thing she says to her mom is, "Mommy, I'm okay, but all my friends are dead." She's 6 years old. a girl hiding in a bathroom with two teachers had told the police that she heard a boy in the classroom screaming, "Help me, I don't want to be here." To which Adam replied, "Well, you're here." And then bah, 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 gunshots, right? Now, according to the reports, this little section here is a little conflicting, and I think the time frame is conflicting because it all happened simultaneously. Because again, he came in at 9:35, right? So Adam is now moving into the next first grade classroom, right? That was nearby, where the classroom teacher, Victoria Soto, had just concealed a couple of her students. She had put some in a closet or the bathroom, something like that. She's trying to hide them. However, some of her other students were still hiding under the desk. Just as Victoria's walking and running her way over to the classroom door to lock the door, Adam just opens the classroom door because he spots the fucking kids. And she's trying to tell him, like, no, the kids are in the auditorium. Like, yeah, like, don't even worry about it. Like, yeah. And at the same time this is all occurring, several children come out of their hiding spots and begin running, trying to run for safety. Lanza ends up fatally shooting some of the students. Victoria is trying to put herself between the students and the shooter, and then he fatally shoots her. And he saw other children underneath the desk, and then he went to go shoot them. One of the students, Jesse Lewis, apparently had screamed at his classmates to run, and 9 of them apparently did. And looked at him dead in his face right before he fatally shot him. I mean, that's a brave fucking kid. Like, to do that, like, to be in there at that moment, you're like 6 years old and you boldly look at him in his face. I mean, that's some sucker punch fucking momentum right there. Like, what the fuck? Brave as fuck, right? So it said that the 6 kids who had escaped because Adam's weapon had jammed or he was reloading. Either way, that's what saved their ass, right? So the 6 surviving kids from the class, they ended up finding a school bus driver and they took refuge nearby inside of a house. So now we're going to go over the survivors. First grade teacher, Caitlin Roig, she was actually 29 years old at the time. She hid her 14 students in the bathroom and barricaded the door, telling them to be completely quiet in order to remain safe. It's believed that Adam actually bypassed her classroom first on the left side. But here's the thing. Apparently a couple of weeks ago, following a lockdown drill, right, there was like a black construction paper that covered the little window and to her door. And because the door was closed and the black construction paper was there, it's believed that he may have just thought it was empty and just didn't go in there. By fucking Sherlock. The school library staff, Yvonne Chech and Marianne Jacob, first hid the 18 children in part of the library at the school used for the lockdown and practice drills. Discovering that one door apparently would not lock, they had the children crawl into a storage room where such barricaded the door with a filing cabinet. Music teacher Mary Rose Christopic barricaded her 4th graders in a tiny supply closet during the rampage. Adam arrived moments later, pounding on the door, screaming, "Let me in," while the students in Christopic's class actually just hid quietly. 2 3rd grade students, chosen as classroom helpers, were walking down the hallway to the office to deliver the morning attendance sheet as the shooting began. Teacher Abby Clements pulled both children into her classroom where they hid. Those kids got lucky. I mean, I used to be that kid in the hallway that would do that to the main office. So Laura Feinstein, a reading specialist at the school, gathered 2 students from outside her classroom and hid them under her desk after they heard the shots. Laura apparently called the school office and tried to call 911, but could not due to the lack of reception on her phone. So she ended up hiding the children for about 40 minutes, at which point law enforcement came to lead them actually out of the room. Sorry. So, by 9:40, that's 5 minutes. All that, 5 minutes. The police hear the final shot. 9:40 a.m., which they believe was Adam actually shooting himself in the lower rear portion of his head with the Glock in classroom 10. 156 shots were fired in basically 5 minutes at that school. 156 shots. 26 people died, 20 of them being children. So now while all this is occurring, Peter, his father, is at work. He's going out, he's getting lunch, and he finds his coworkers surrounding the television news. They're like, oh my God, what's happening? The story's developing. And he remembers saying, man, both my kids went to that school. Whoa, right? Because you're having that moment as a parent, right? Which I can understand, right? Heads back to the office, but the story as it's going, it's like, it's hitting him in the head, right? And he's like, I can't focus. He ends up deciding, you know what? I'm going to head home. After the news report starts to say, oh, a 20 and 24-year-old was involved in a shooting. He's not able to focus at work. He decides, I'm going to head home. He decides he's going to head home, watch the news coverage there. And when he arrives, he's greeted by a reporter just waiting for him in his driveway. Like, hey, sir, so someone in your home seems to be involved with the shootings at the elementary school. Questions? And he's kind of like, the fuck? Wow. Closes the door and runs to the television. He sees that CNN was identifying the shooter as Ryan Lanza. And that didn't sit right with him. He's like, no, that's not Ryan. He immediately calls up his second wife, Shelley, while she's at work, and he keeps repeating, it's Peter, I think it's Adam. 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 Shelley's not understanding, like, what the hell's going on with him. So she's like, all right, like, I need to get home. She gets home. And they call Ryan. They're trying to get a hold of him. And they make their 2-hour drive from Connecticut over to Hoboken, New Jersey. By that time, Ryan had apparently left his house early. And when he arrived home, there was the police there waiting for him. They taped off his apartment building. And unbeknownst to them, Adam, as I said earlier, was carrying Ryan's ID. The whole family ends up at the police station to answer questions for the interrogation, obviously. After hours and hours of this, the family ends up being moved to Peter's aunt house so they can get their heads together, and then they're moved to a hotel, then they're moved to Shamley's family houses and other places that were considered like safe houses, with like a full protective unit, right? They got canines, they're doing interviews with the FBI, like they were protected all around because they're trying to figure out what the fuck is happening and why did this happen. Adam Lanza made a very nefarious mark in a history when he did what he did and shot himself afterwards. He left many in need of psychological help. When he needed psychological help, had it out there for him, and he refused it from his family. I mean, from the parents and the families of the friends of the children who died, the adults who tried to like protect them, and the family he leaves. I mean, it's a fuck fest of like, what the fuck? I mean, there was, the signs were there, but his parents genuinely did everything they could. Unfortunately, the coddling of his mother, feeding into his desires of everything he wanted, did to like accommodate him, did exacerbate the situation. But he had the support system. He just didn't want it. And I think part of the reason why he excluded his father towards the end was because he knew he couldn't bend his father over like that. You know what I mean? And the biggest problem is, although the resources were there, Nancy paid with her life and the lives of others through coddling her son for everything that he wanted, not need. Adam knew what he can get away with. Like, he knew which parent he could fuck with. Yes, he may have been on the spectrum, but to me it seemed like that was masking over the other conditions, right? Him being on the spectrum seemed to have taken him away from what was really going on when he was really narcissistic, and potentially beyond the schizophrenia spectrum as a schizoid personality disorder, which is a personality disorder characterized by a lack of interest in social relationships like your parents, your brother, friends, a tendency toward a solitary or kind of sheltered lifestyle, secretiveness, emotional coldness, detachment, and apathy. Affected individuals may be unable to form intimate attachments to others and simultaneously possess a rich and elaborate but exclusively internal fantasy world. Bingo, think we got it. personality disorders that are susceptible to like worsening with age, like will include these things like paranoia, schizoid, schizotypal, obsessive compulsive, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic, avoidance, and dependent. Like these are all things that Adam is just checking off his fucking list, right? He may have been on the autistic spectrum, but I really think he was more on the schizoid. Like he had to have been on the schizophrenic spectrum first, which is why a lot of the symptoms, I believe, became overlooked or rather misdiagnosed. Between that and then the issue of his mother not asking for the help when she truly needed it. At the end, 28 people died, including Adam. And it's horrendous. I mean, the mass shooting in school, when they happen, they stay with you, right? Because I remember being in high school and learning about Columbine, right? And I remember the threats of the shootings that would occur at my school or threats of a potential bomb, remembering the heightened security that would happen at my school, the nervousness of the students. I remember how empty, when there was supposedly a shooter coming into school, I remember how empty the hallways was, and it was fucking creepy. And I remember thinking, if anyone came in here, there's nowhere for me to fucking hide. I remember students mapping out an escape route just in case if we had an active shooter. I mean, as a child, when you're facing death, or even as a teenager, it changes you, right? Because usually in your youth, you feel invincible. You feel like you're not going to die. You feel like you're going to live forever. And then the comprehension of your mortality sets in. That fucks with your head, man. Anyways, but as a side note, there's a conspiracy theorist named Alex Jones. He was sued for defamation because of the families of the 26 loved ones. He made a claim that, they faked their deaths. The shooting was a hoax. On his website, InfoWars, the shooting apparently became more of an advocacy, like, of gun advocates versus gun laws that should be there, which is disheartening to say, right? Children were killed, and it's called a hoax as if adults don't harm children, right? And unfortunately, there are adults who will harm children, right? Whether it's murder, rape, beatings, abuse, torture, and God knows how much more, right? And even these things happen by other children, but it's worse when it comes from an adult because it's the unsettling idea that they know better and they still chose a violent path. I kind of just think calling it Alex Jones doing saying it's a hoax, that's not the time for that kind of thing, you know? And my heart went out, and it continues to go out to those directly affected by the tragedy and those who were traumatized, even just reading about it, watching it on the news. I mean, mass shootings are a terrifying nightmare for Americans, whether you're at an elementary school, at a high school, opening night at a movie theater, a major concert that's across from a hotel, at a club. Either way, mass shootings have now become like the pocket of like fear. You could be at a mall, people just, you don't know. I mean, they're selling trauma kits now for people, quick class, so you could pick them up on Amazon or your local store just in case. Like, that's our society. Like, in case we have another mass shooting, here's how you help. Like, it's maddening. But yeah, I mean, like, you see all this stuff happening, and then for a conspiracy theorist to be like, they're just faking this. Like, no, that's not true. They're just saying that, you know, to just have their ways with gun laws. Children died. I mean, children die at the hands of adults, but, like, the fuck, man. But yeah, that's the crime that I'm covering for 52 lockup. I know he didn't get locked up at the end, but it is just still a horrific, horrible crime. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. If you guys had any other additional questions, of course, I have references in the video link description below. And feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. Give me your feedback. Tell me what you remember about this. Did you know anyone? Like, give me some feedback. And for those who may have actually lived through the actual tragedy, I apologize if this video actually does upset you. I know reliving these kind of things can be very severe, especially with PTSD, and I hope you guys are getting the healing that you guys need. Alrighty, thank you so much, and thank you for tuning in to 52 Lockup.